I'm Charles Joseph Redner. I was born in Philadelphia in 1939. I was named after my father, who was Charles Jackson Redner. And I wouldn't be surprised that he wasn't named after that famous Confederate general, Stonewall Jackson, because as my father tells me, his mother's side, the Pease, P-E-A-S-E, he raised a regiment from southern New Jersey and actually went south to fight with Lee. Then on the other side, my mother, she was from English descent, and she lost her husband, this is my grandmother, when he was 36, and my mother, Dorothy Elizabeth Redner, was only 16. So what happened back in those days, 2 years after my grandfather died, my grandmother wanted to remarry, but there was a restriction. No children could come into the house. She had 3 children. My Uncle Joe was old enough, he joined the Navy. My Uncle Jimmy was young, and he was sent to the Milton Hershey School for Boys out in Hershey, Pennsylvania, for orphans. And my mother was kind of on her own. She lived with families and friends, I suppose. But my earliest remembrance is probably my grandmom's Sanifer. The sweet, sweet love of a Southern lady. Love covers me like a quilted blanket, warms my blood, bones, and heart. I feel her love for me in ways my mind cannot comprehend. Unconditional love pours over me, and there is much left over each day, then made available for tomorrow and many tomorrows thereafter. Come here, Charles. I've made your favorite Sunday breakfast, hominy grits with melted butter, red-eyed gravy over ham and hush puppies. Charles comes out Charles, and her accent is no accent to me. I don't recall a time before her, and I talked just like her. However, we reside in North Philadelphia, not South Carolina, where she was born. I call her Grandmom Sanifer, although she is not related to me. From my earliest memory until age 6, she is the only nurturing adult in my life, and she is more than enough. She is the dynamo that generates all the love I require. I called her Grandmom Sanifer. She was just a friend of my mother's family. I don't know how they ever met. It was before I could recall. But she was from South Carolina, and she just loved me to bits. And I loved her so much. She was just, I can't express how much I feel about her. As a matter of fact, I write about her because she's never left my thoughts. She just raised me. But she was from South Carolina, so we had all this Southern food. We'd have grits for breakfast. You have grits with breakfast, you'd put, you'd put milk on it. You'd have grits for lunch, and you would put butter on it. And you'd have grits for dinner, and you'd put red-eyed gravy on it. So I grew up eating a lot of grits and everything else from the South. You name it, we ate it. God, I loved her cooking, and she loved me, and I loved her, and it was a great childhood. I have no regrets at all. Earliest memory I have, and I think it's a memory I have and not just a photograph, is me in a Navy uniform and my father in a Navy uniform. This would have been about 1941, at the very beginning of World War II. He went off to war, and my mother, as I said, lived probably with some other family members, and I have very little recollection of her. This is a picture of little Charles with his dad, who was going into the Navy, and I was just dressed there as his mascot, I guess. When the war ended, I'll remember specifically, I was around 7 or 8 years old. My mother said, we're going to Florida. We got on a train and went to Jacksonville, Florida, and took like a 2-day trip. The next day, she introduced me, said, here's your father, Charles. And I looked at him and I said, that's not my father. And the reason being is he had a big beard. So he immediately went into the washroom, he shaved off his beard, and I accepted that that was my father. And that's how I first met my father when I was about 8 years old. I loved my father dearly from the minute he shaved his beard until he died. I loved my father. He was just a happy-go-lucky guy, never gave me any trouble, and I never gave him any trouble. He was just wonderful. I didn't have a close relationship like that with my mother, but we understood one another. What I failed to understand until I was much older is that she had a tough life. She basically, was on her own at 16, 17, 18, and she didn't have an ideal childhood growing up, and I never gave her the slack for what she may have gone through as a youngster. We stayed in Florida for a little while, then we came back to Philadelphia, and by then my Uncle Jimmy, my mother's middle brother, came to live with us. So my Uncle Jimmy was just as much a brother as he was my uncle. And they saved up their money. I remember them saving their money. Every Friday they got paid, they'd put money in a little tin can. And when they had enough money, they bought a home in New Jersey, not far from where I was raised between 2 and 6. And my Uncle Jimmy, and my mother and father were a core family, and along came my little sister. She was adopted, and we brought her into the household. So that was my core family growing up. She was so much younger than me. If I was 10 and she was 2, I didn't want anything to do with her. And I was out playing baseball every day. I never came home for dinner. My mother I love my mother. She used to stand out back with a broom because I'm going to be late for dinner, but she hit me with a whisk and it never hurt, but she got her point across. But I would play out in the woods and I would play baseball until it got dark, and I was never home on time for dinner. And so I didn't have much to do with my little sister then. As a matter of fact, as the years went on, when she got married, she moved out to Arizona, so we didn't have much time together when we were growing up. But later on, when I moved to Arizona, we became very close, and she was my dearest, closest friend. We lost her to lung cancer about 5 years ago, but until that time, I really knew I had a sister, and I still miss her today greatly. It's funny, I didn't see much of my father growing up because he worked. He was a truck driver, a union truck driver. He made very good salary. And as I said, with my Uncle Jimmy living with us, he worked for the Philadelphia Electric Company. They had 2 incomes back then, and so we were fairly well off. I weren't rich by any sense, but we had, good money. But I didn't see him. He would be up and go to work before I got up, and he would come home even later than me, coming home late from baseball. So I didn't see much of my father, excuse me, or my uncle. My uncle worked at Philadelphia Electric, and he worked shift work. So he would work 8 to 5, and then 5 to midnight, midnight to 8 the next morning. And so I didn't see much of my adults. I pretty much raised myself, but I was happy. We lived in, this very, very rural area. And when we first moved there, the corn stalks were higher than I was, and we could play hide and seek in it. And we had rabbits, and we had chickens, and we had one pet chicken named Sally who had kitchen privileges. She would come in and pick up the breadcrumbs off the floor. It was just a wonderful, I lived in the wilderness, and I loved it. And I was pretty much alone, but I don't remember much supervision because my parents, didn't have to supervise me. I was out there in the woods. I was out there playing with my friends, and basically was used to raising myself. As I said, from 2 to 8, I was out in the woods by myself, and I loved it back in the woods. I mean, I would go back, you'd find wild berries all over. We had blueberries and blackberries and mulberries and strawberries and apple trees and peach trees. And it was incredible. I mean, it's like growing up a nature boy, and it was thrilling. I could go up and sit in a tree for 8 hours just sitting there, just looking at nature. I mean, it was so relaxing and such a wonderful way to grow up. I feel bad that even my children living in, the suburbs never experienced what I experienced back then in the wilderness. I think the most fun that we had is my father had a boat outside of Atlantic City, and the Atlantic City Marina. And we would go down there on weekends, and that was a lot of fun. And we'd go out fishing, and we'd stay on the boat overnight, and I really enjoyed doing that. It's probably the most fun I had with my parents was when we went down to the boat. I had a lot of friends, and if you grow up in a small town like I did in New Jersey, you have to play baseball. So we played played baseball every single day. I mean, almost until the snow comes in the winter, until, it clears out in February. And so, no, I had a lot of friends. I had a dear friend, Johnny McCoy, and he was housebound. He died early. He died before he was 18. He had leukemia. But I loved Johnny, and I would go to Johnny's house, and we would play board games, and he was probably my best friend. I graduated from 8th grade, and going into high school, my parents moved back to Philadelphia. Now, this was the worst thing you could do for a teenager, is take him out of his roots. I've been, since 3rd grade, all my friends, all my compatriots, and growing up with them, going to a high school where 99% of the kids were preparing to go off to college. I ended up in Philadelphia at a trade school, and they were trying to teach me to be a carpenter, a plumber, an auto mechanic. I don't want any of this. I'm saying I'm looking for, I'd go to my counselors. I want some college prep courses. I want to go to college. They wouldn't help me. I never got the college prep courses I needed. So what happened was a blessing in disguise. One door opens, another closes, another one opens. And I ended up getting a little slip of paper, and it said, you go to this address in Center City, Philadelphia, and hand it to them. You're now working for them. And I walked into an advertising public relations company. I had no idea what that was, but it clicked with me. My boss was Robert Edelman. The company was Robertson, Edelman, and Montgomery, and he owned a drama school, Bessie V. Hicks School of Dramatic Arts. He owned the school, so when I'm 17, he sends me to this school. There were 2 divisions. I went to the broadcast division, where I learned to be a disc jockey and a newscaster, or a rip and read guy, and operate a board. And then the drama school was downstairs, and there were some famous people went to that school. Way back when was Jeanette MacDonald, Charles Bronson, and Bruce Dern all graduated from that school. And I graduated from the broadcast side. And then when I turned 18, the agency was producing a live television show, which was equivalent to what you'd see in Good Morning America, or USA Today, whatever is out there today, where they have a complete show that shows, they have an interview segment, they have a cooking segment, they have a home decorating segment, and I was the associate producer. So my first real job in broadcasting was producing a live TV show in the 4th largest market of America. And I loved it. There's nothing more thrilling than a live TV show. And the reason is, a Broadway show, you're doing the same routine week in and week out. Live television like that, 5 days a week, it's a new show every day. I mean, your adrenaline just gets going. We had an alcoholic producer who came in. I was the associate producer, and he would come in 5 minutes to showtime, want to change the run sheet. He'd get the talent upset. He'd get the director upset. Well, he was asked to leave, and I ended up being the producer without the title. But it was so exciting. I mean, I loved every second of it. And we had very important guests. I remember spending a day with Jonathan Winters, the comedian. What a riot that was. I mean, I'll never forget that day. He was something else. So I got started in broadcasting without really knowing the business, just coming right from school and right into the business. And I loved it. I have to tell you about Bob Edelman. He's a genius, literally. And he kept coming up with these ideas. He invented takeout kitchens before there was Kentucky Fried Chicken. He invented takeout fish, which was before Arthur's Treacher's. He invented the Bantam Supermarket, which is now 7-Elevens and Circle K's. He started the precursor of TV Guide. And I got involved in every one of these businesses he started. I mean, I would work for him 9 to 5 at the agency, and then at night I'd go out and I'd deep fry chicken and it was a fun thing. I just loved it. In the supermarkets, I became a marketing manager for a chain of Bantam supermarkets, and I had to go out and address the people. I'd go to the meetings and tell them about they needed to do the signage and how to treat customers. So I got such an education in advertising, public relations, and promotion that by the time Bob wrote a book called The Devil's Brigade. It became a movie with William Holden, And Bob went off and just left me alone in Philadelphia to fend for myself. But he treated me, he taught me so much that by the time he left, I became the executive vice president of the largest billing agency in Philadelphia. What was great about writing was when I graduated from the Bessie Hicks School of Dramatic Arts and came full-time to the agency. Well, actually, I went to night school 7 nights. We went to school 4 nights a week. So I worked, 9 to 5 at the agency every day. And I was given the opportunity. Bob said to me, stay with me and I'll teach you everything about the business. So I started out in the public relations department. Then he moved me into the broadcast, and I ended up being able to write radio commercials. So I'm 18, 19 years old. I'm writing radio commercials for Emerson air conditioners, and I'm writing for Burke's hot dogs. So even though I wasn't the final word on it, I got a taste of writing, and I liked it, and I liked it very much. So that's when I first started writing, is writing advertising. And eventually, at some point, I had my own company, and I had to write all the magazine ads, all the newspaper ads, and all the radio commercials. And I wrote a lot of the Subaru commercials. Initially, it was a Subaru region, and I had to write the television commercials. And then I moved with the client 3 times. What happens in the agency business, if you're an account supervisor on a big account, a lot of times if it moves to another agency, they want to take the supervisor. It's just the client is happy with you and they want you to go along. So I was probably sold 3 times to 3 different agencies with the Subaru business. But I loved it because I love Subaru. I'll never forget my boss walking in one day and says, "Where does your loyalty lie? Does it lie with Subaru or the agency?" I said, "It's got to be obvious to you. It's 49-51%. He said, "Oh, okay," but he never asked me where the percentage lie was. But I loved the Subaru people. It was like I worked for them. So I had got a taste of writing. But when I left the agency business, I formed my own company. I formed a media company, and it was basically a print buying company for the automotive industry. And I set up a network of 300 newspapers across America. And my job was to find newspaper ads for all of those manufacturers. You name every single manufacturer in America was a client of mine. And I would provide the newspapers with full-page, full-color ads for the Sunday editions. And when I did that, I didn't have to do any writing for the business, but I started writing articles for magazines, and I started writing a novel. So it just kind of shifted from advertising into creative writing. When I went to school starting in 3rd grade, I had to walk to school and I had to walk through the woods. And on the way home, I would never come home one time. It just wasn't my nature. I would climb up a tree and I would daydream, and I could sit there for hours. And as a matter of fact, when I started writing, when I lived in Tucson, for me to write a novel, I never did an outline, I never figured anything out. I would just go by myself, close my eyes. I'd usually sit in a hot tub after working out, and I'd watch the movie. I'd watch the chapter on the back of my eyelids, and then I would go to my typewriter, my computer, and I would type what I saw. And that goes back, I know, to my childhood of just being alone, enjoying being alone, and entertaining myself. I mean, I could be a jungle boy. I know it. It was in my nature. I loved it. Loved being alone. And even when we lived in Florida, I used to go back into the Okefenokee by myself and run around in the jungle of the Okefenokee. And it just, that was my goal, was to be out there in nature. I have to tell you how I met my wife. Working for the agency, one of our clients was a place called Clementon Lake Park, which was an amusement park where I grew up, same town I grew up in. And they wanted to bring people into the town to shop, because what was happening then, the supermarket, the very second supermarket built in America was called the Cherry Hill Mall. And these little communities were losing business. So they wanted to get people to come back into the little towns to do their shopping. So they had a beauty contest. To enter the beauty contest, you had to be 18. They ended up, there was a newspaper strike at that time, so I ended up in a booth sitting in the middle of the town doing my disc jockey thing and reading the news, and a flock of these high school girls would always be around me. One of them really took a liking to me, and I took a liking to her, and so I started going to meet her, went over to her home, but I found out at the time she was only 15. And what happened is it was an Italian family that was old traditional family. We were never alone for the next 3 years. Every time we went someplace, we were escorted, either with her sister and her boyfriend, or her mother and her father, or an aunt or an uncle. So we kind of dated for 3 years, and then eventually we turned, I guess, 21, and she was 19, and I guess we got married back then. But she should have not joined that beauty contest at 15. Probably the moment I went to her house and her mother and father laid down the law and told me this is the way it's going to be. She's 15 going on 16. You will never be alone with her. If you want to see her, you have to come on Sunday. You will go to church with us. You will come home. You will eat with us. If we're going to Aunt Julie's, you will be coming with us. If you want to go to a movie, you're going to have your sister and her boyfriend go with you. So once I knew those are the ground rules, I had to cut bait and go, or I decided to stick it out. And I loved it. And I loved my in-laws. Talk about cooks, and you asked me about my mother's cooking. She wasn't a good cook, but my mother-in-law, I mean, she would feed me all day long. I'd get there at 10 in the morning on Sunday, and she'd have eggs and bacon and all kinds of breakfast fruits and vegetables. And then she would make spaghetti. We had spaghetti every single Sunday, and I loved it. And then after that, maybe you'd have a ham. I mean, it was eating all day long, and I loved it. And I loved my in-laws. They were the sweetest, most beautiful people on earth. Got married, got my own house, and settled in. My first house was a triplex, so I basically didn't have to pay a mortgage or anything. I had two people that were renting from me. And we had 3 kids right away. My oldest son is Charles, and my oldest daughter is Charlene, and my youngest son was Sean. And we had 3 children. But I was like my father. I was out of the house before light and coming home late. And I traveled the whole country, and I traveled literally the world with my job. And I loved what I was doing. So I didn't have, as I look back, a role model for parenting. I didn't have one in my father, and I didn't have one, I didn't have anybody to look after. And all I tried to do was raise the bar for my kids. I was the first one to become a white-collar worker. I was the first one to get a college degree. I was the first one to become an officer in the military. So I thought I was setting up all these bars for them to jump over, but they needed the time, and I admit I didn't spend the time taking them to soccer matches. I took my daughter to a couple of concerts. It's funny, the kids don't remember anything that bothered them. They only remember the good times. So when I took my daughter to a concert, and she will always talk about that. It was the first time I ever got high, because I didn't smoke, but boy, Elton John. I mean, and I had a blast. I can tell you, I had as much fun as my daughter watching an Elton John concert. My marriage advice is probably for the male, for the man, for the father, to put more balance in your life. Remember that, if you're going to have children, that you need to spend time with them. Give you an example of when this really came to light to me. I was an account supervisor for Subaru at an advertising agency, and I had an account executive that worked for me. And he came in one day and he said, "Charlie, I hate to tell you this, but I'm leaving the firm." And I was all upset, and I said, no, why? You're doing a great job. I love you. Is it money? Can we do something about the money? He said, no. He says, I have the greatest opportunity. I said, what's that? Tell me what it is. What could be better than this? I know you love this job. He says, I get a chance to be a stay-at-home dad. My wife got a better job. She's going to get more money, all the money we need, and I am so looking forward to that. And that was a really wake-up call. Way too late for me to take advantage of it, but that was about the mid-'80s, beginning of the 1990s, when that became important to men, is to be that active with their children. So I missed the boat on that. But that would be my advice for future dads. Stayed married until my kids were, 18. I got divorced at some point, and I became a single parent for a number of years until my youngest son finally left. My eldest son joined the Navy, and my youngest son stayed with me. My daughter had left by then. She got married and left. And so I raised my last son till he got a very good job up in Connecticut and left the house. And so I was a single parent for a while. So I did get to do a little parenting, but it was past the stage where I could have molded them better. I mean, they had grown up on their own or with their mother's, guidance at that time. I've written my entire autobiography. I've taken a class called Guided Autobiography. It's a UCLA professor developed this course, and I took it here in Laguna Woods. And one of the toughest chapters to write is one you title Regrets. And of course, I believe everybody has regrets. Some people say, no, I wouldn't change a thing, but no, I obviously would change the importance I had placed on work and achieving success in all areas of my life at the expense of being with my wife and my children. I would definitely recommend that I would have changed that, and I would recommend future generations think about it. I was lopsided, way lopsided. You have to be more centered or more down the middle and try to, not just be the perfect professional, the perfect soldier, the perfect whatever, and spend time with your family and with your children. And I missed out on all that. But I didn't know I was missing out on it. But I know now that for sure I was, and I did. I did everything the hard way. I joined the Army National Guard in 1960. Went away, did basic training like every Army recruit does. When I got out, I had a 4-year obligation to the military. So I was an EM for 2 years. I ended up, you take secondary training after you take basic training, and I became an intermediate speed radio operator, which I loved it because when you're in the military, and like we were, we'd go out on training missions, and we'd spend the summers or at least a month up in Canada practically, up way in upstate New York. When you set up a radio network, nobody bothers you. You never get any crappy details. You never get KP. You never get pulled aside to do some labor. You just set up your radio networks and you do it. So after 2 years of being an EM and a radio operator, I went off to officer training school. And I trained where the state police, the state of New Jersey State Police train. And I went through officer training, took 2 years to get, I guess I ended up being a second lieutenant. I am an officer and a gentleman according to an act of Congress. And it's funny, why did I become an officer? You have to ask yourself, why do you want to put additional training on you? Well, the basic reason was you tell the generals, you get before a court, you have a general and 2 colonels, and they ask you why you want to become an officer. And you say, well, I want to use the best of my ability to use everything I have for defense of our country. The real reason was I didn't like waiting in line to be served. I wanted a private little room to sleep in, and I wanted my own private bathroom. So I became an officer in the military for those reasons. And I got my commission, and I ended up being an executive officer of a line company. But all this is part-time. It's like school. It took me 7 years to graduate college. It took me 7 years to get rid of my military obligation. I do everything the hard way. But that's why I explained earlier, my family didn't see much of me. I was a rocket taking off in business. I was attending college at night, I attended a drama school at night, and I attended the military at night and then weekends. So I just filled up my life with things to do. But I loved it. I loved being in the military. I really did. I enjoyed it. I was in the military at the time of the Cuban Missile Crisis, and some of our units actually did get called up, but it was a very traumatic time. But it wasn't the kind of thing where frontline troops were going to be from Florida and landing in Cuba at that time. It was just a matter of, was somebody going to launch the biggest bombs that have ever been launched against each other, Russia and the United States? And living through that, and obviously the Russians backed down. If you know your little bit of history, the ships pulled away and they stopped bringing their missiles into Cuba. So that was a pretty traumatic time. My girlfriend at 15, 16, John F. Kennedy came to Philadelphia, actually came to Valley Forge campaign speech in 1960. He was running for president, and she wanted to see him. So we went out there. It was I had to work till 5 o'clock and rush hour traffic. Getting out to Valley Forge, we ended up getting out there. All the other speakers were finished already. We walk in, and we're so late, and the place is packed. It's the Valley Forge Convention Center. And I think we're not going to get anywhere near, we're not going to be able to see anybody. And I showed my press pass. I had a press pass because we published a weekly newspaper. And they said, "Oh, come with me, sir." And they marched us all the way down, literally in front of the podium that you could actually touch. It wasn't a stage 40 feet high. It was just, you could touch the podium where the presidential candidate was about to speak. And my girlfriend just got in front of him. And then when JFK came out and spoke, the world erupted when he was finished in applause. And she reached over, and instead of just shaking his hand, she grabbed onto his hands and she hung on tight. And she said, "Take the picture, take the picture." So I got up with my Argus C3 and set the lens and everything. I finally got a picture of her and JFK. So that was a thrill for her. In 1968, one of my clients in New Jersey wanted to campaign for Robert Kennedy. Robert Kennedy hadn't even said he was going to run yet, but we were trying to get him to come to Camden, New Jersey. And we ended up doing that. And Bobby had announced, and he came, and he spoke at a rally. And then within 2 months, we had lost our candidate. He was assassinated out here in California. So we had political debts, but no way to pay them. So we decided to hold a memorial dinner for Robert Kennedy. And this senator, George McGovern, said he would come and be our keynote speaker. We still couldn't get anybody to come to the dinner. It just wasn't a big attraction. But a week before the dinner, George McGovern announced in 1968, he's running for president. Now I had U.S. senators calling me and want to sit on the dais with George, and I wanted 15 minutes to speak, and I told them they'd get 5, and I pulled the plug as I was setting up the audio. So we ended up, George McGovern ran in 72 again, so I was with him in 72. And I love George McGovern, but and I have a picture with George. I'll have to show it to you. He, you'll say, for at least 1 minute in time, I sincerely had the attention of a U.S. presidential candidate in my sight. George was a great guy. I have a funny story about George. I drive up to North Jersey to meet him one day, and he says, after his stump speech, at a luncheon stump speech, he says, "Come with me, Charlie." So the two of us go down to the basement, and this is a motel. And he tells the Secret Service, "You guys wait up here." He goes down to the basement with me, and he takes off his coat, and he does his tie, and he takes his shirt off, and he takes his pants off, and he said, "I'm changing my suit because I'm going to New York where there's going to be a national audience. I'm going to be televised, and I'm sure they're going to see me. I don't want to see me in this suit, so I'm changing my suit." And then he looked at me, and he glared at me, and he said, "And Charlie, don't you dare tell anybody, boxers or briefs." Because in 1972, he was asked that question at every single stop. Don't know why. That became the question to ask the presidential candidate, boxers or briefs. So that's my funny George McGovern. So I love George McGovern. On the other hand, when I was working for Whittlesey and Partners, they had the entire state of Pennsylvania, Republican Party was our client. So I worked for the Republican side. As a matter of fact, my boss's wife, Faith Ryan Whittlesey, became President Reagan's right-hand woman in the White House. So I met a lot of people from the White House, and one of the special was Jamie Humes. Jamie Humes was a speechwriter for 4 U.S. presidents, from Eisenhower to Nixon to Bush 1, I believe, and probably Bush 2 or Reagan. I guess Reagan. And I just love this man. So here I am working on my own for the Democrats in New Jersey, and I'm working for the Republican as a paid consultant in Pennsylvania. But we all got along, and I loved, Jamie Humes was such a bright man. I mean, he worked for 4 presidents, and the last time I talked to him a couple years ago, he was teaching in Colorado, University of Colorado in Colorado Springs, and I said, well, why are you there? You graduated from Penn, why aren't you back at Penn? He says, Charlie, there isn't a university in America that's going to hire a conservative professor. And I thought, how sad that is, because he had so much to offer the world. And he still does. He's still alive. He lives in Philadelphia. So I did both political sides, but we got along enough that we could work together when needed be. You know, I think things have definitely changed as here we are in 2021. They're not the good old days. I realized we're all one, and it was just great being able to work, you know, for the Democrats and the Republicans. I always said to myself, I'm working for the Democrats for the highest office in the land. I'm working for the Republicans for basically statewide offices. So I kind of gave myself, you know, even though I favored the Democratic presidents that came up through the lines rather than the Republicans. In the year 2000, I was living in New Jersey. I was married to my second wife, and we came out to Tucson, Arizona in January. I was running my own business by then, and I could afford to take off a whole month, so I took the month of January off. And I came to Tucson, Arizona, and I fell in love. And I never went back to New Jersey, except to get my furniture and clothes. And I moved to Tucson, Arizona in 2000. Got a little warm in the summer, so I bought a place up in Durango, Colorado. And I had the greatest life going back and forth and back and forth. And it was really wonderful. About a year after moving, 2002, 2003, my in-laws lived in New Jersey. We just couldn't leave them alone anymore. So we wanted to move everybody from Arizona. I had moved them initially to Arizona, but I couldn't leave them. So I had to come to a place that had a more gentle climate. So my brother-in-law lived in Mission Viejo, and he said, there's this great place called Laguna Woods. Bring my mom and dad here, and I'll be grateful too. So we moved everybody to Laguna Woods. As soon as I was able to read, I had this Mother Goose book. It wasn't this big, it was this big. Maybe because I was small, and I would turn the big pages, and I would read and read and read and read and read nursery rhymes and little short stories, and I just loved it. And I never stopped reading. I mean, my whole life. As I said, the books that I've accumulated over the years, I still have them from the time. This book I had when I was a little kid, the one that Uncle Jimmy gave me, I was 10 years old. I cherish books. I just love books so much. My Uncle Jimmy gave me this book, Western Star by Stephen Vincent Benet. He's more famous for some other works, for the John Brown's Body and other works. But my uncle gave this to me. It must have been the Book of the Month Club, and he wasn't into poetry, so he gave it to me. And I'll always remember, now for my country, that it may live, all that I have, all that I am, I'll give. Though it is not much beside the gift of the brave, accept it, for 'tis all I have. That's Stephen Vincent Benet's very last words. He wrote this book, Western Star, and what it is, it's a beautiful book. It talks about the time the Pilgrims left England until they got here and what happened here. It was supposed to be 3 books, but he died before he got beyond Western Star. But I fell in love with books at a very young age. I mean, I was probably 10 when my Uncle Jimmy gave me this book. and I've been reading ever since. I have to mention this one, and I even remember her name. This is called Statistical Analysis. This is Statistics 101. I was a psych major in college. I'll never forget that professor. But I aced her class, and I look at this book today and say, you were insane, Charlie. How in the world did you ever pick up what that was all about? The other side of the Redner family, Louis H. Redner wrote the music to O Little Town of Bethlehem for an Episcopal church in Philadelphia. And the pastor in 1865 went over to the Holy Land, and he wrote that little poem which became the words to O Little Town of Bethlehem. He brought them back to Philadelphia. He gave them to must have been my great-great-uncle, and he wrote the music for it. And it was first played in this little Episcopal church in Rittenhouse Square in Philadelphia, and it's gone to be a world-class, piece of music that is sung by children throughout the world. While over in Tucson, I met a dear, dear, dear friend who wrote Dances with Wolves, Michael Blake. Michael was a dear soul. I met him, I guess in 2002 or 3, and we were friends. I'll tell you how good a friend we were. I asked him for poetry one day. I published an anthology, and I said, Michael, do you have any poetry? He said, oh, Charlie, no one's ever asked me for a poem before. So he was so delighted, so we became very good friends. And I'll tell you how good a friend he was. I called him up one day, and I was talking to him. I said, I'm doing a poetry reading in Oceanside. That's, 10 miles south of here, but it's 500 miles from Tucson. He said, Charlie, can I read poetry with you? So he came all the way over from Tucson and read with me in Oceanside. And I went to his house one day. He lived on a big ranch just south of Tucson. And what he did after Dances with Wolves and the rewards he got for that, he went to Nevada and he bought wild horses, the Mustangs, and he brought them back to Arizona to let them live their lives out in peace. And he fed them and took care of them. What a beautiful, gentle soul. Michael Blake. I became his beta reader. Don't ask me why, but ever since I met Michael, he wouldn't send anything out to be published unless he ran it by me. And he sent me his very last book. As a matter of fact, I have a copy of it. It's never been published. And his wife called me and said she didn't think very much of the book. She didn't want me to publish it, so I never published it. But Michael did send me poems, and I published his poems in one of the anthologies I did. I started writing as soon as I reached Tucson, Arizona. I went to a writers' conference in Tucson, Southwest Writers' Conference, and a poet was a keynote speaker on a Saturday night, and Taylor Molly, and I just fell in love with poetry. I'd never written poetry. I didn't care about it, but I came away from that night and I never stopped writing. So I've written one book of poetry and I published it. This is called Long A-Coming. I have a second book that is ready for publishing, and I have to just coordinate it. And then I met a man in Tucson who had a child with Down syndrome, a little girl, and I told him that I knew a famous boxer back in Philadelphia. His name was Joey Diardella. I said he had a Down syndrome child, and he took his son everywhere. This is back in the 1950s, and most children with Down syndrome weren't seen in public, but he took his child everywhere. And he was a world-class boxer. He's a Hall of Fame boxer, middleweight champ of the world. And this fellow from Tucson with the daughter with Down syndrome said, you got to write that story. I said, he doesn't want it written. I've talked to him a few times. So I called up the boxer, and he says, yeah, write it. So I went, interviewed him, and I wrote this book. It's a nonfiction book. It's an authorized biography, and it's about how he took his child everywhere with him, and he helped the Kennedys and Shriver start the very first Special Olympics in 1968 in Chicago. Living in Tucson as a border state, Arizona as a border state, and 9/11 came along. As a matter of fact, I was in New Jersey on 9/11, and I was supposed to fly back to Arizona, but I postponed it by one day. And of course, we all know what happened on 9/11 when the planes hit the towers and they came down, and what happened at the Pentagon and in a West Field in western Pennsylvania. I had to stay another week in New Jersey waiting to get home. I couldn't fly home. So then I came back, and I was concerned about the border. I knew some Border Patrol agents, and we were all concerned not so much about migrant workers. I got concerned that bad people like Al-Qaeda could come across the border. And why would they come across the border? Because it was pretty much open, and you could come through Mexico. You could pay to have your people. So I decided I'd write a novel. My heroine here is Maggie Lopez, Mexican-American Border Patrol agent. And the premise is that people don't remember, but Khalid Sheikh Mohammed wanted 10 planes flying into 10 different cities and targets. And Osama bin Laden said, no, let's just do 4 planes, East Coast, leaving East Coast cities with East Coast targets. And he was right, because logistics on it, we might have even figured out what they were doing. But in my novel, a dozen terrorists are attempting to come across the border to create havoc in the rest of the country. And our gal Maggie Lopez is charged with seeing what she can do about that. I wrote a bunch of poems, and I wrote a bunch of short stories. So I started the Hummingbird Review, and I can just read you. Here's our mission statement. The Hummingbird Review promotes writing for publishing both new writers and fully established literary figures. The review is committed to portraying the beauty and challenges of life, the full human experience, through literature, art, and cross-cultural promotion. And so that was number 1, and then we did one. Then we started themes. This theme was Arizona. And the next one I published. These are books that I've published. So in addition to writing, I also publish. This one is on Africa, and we had a lot of poets. Met some poets from Africa that we've included in there. There's this book was about people who write biographies, and we have a lot of biographies in that. This is On the Border. This is in both Spanish and English. Poetry, short stories, essays, you name it. This one was on these are the writers from the 50s. This is all about the writers from the 50s. And then this one was about Hollywood. And we have a lot of stories in here that have a Hollywood bent to them. So, and the last book I've written is at the publisher now. I called it Jungle Boy, but I think we're going to rename it Raised on the Run. And Raised on the Run is a true story, a Holocaust survivor, friend and neighbor of mine. I wrote his life story. He was an orphan. His mother left him in Germany when he was 3. And she left him in an orphanage with his 2 brothers, and she and his stepfather escaped Nazi Germany, went to Switzerland. From Switzerland, they went to Russia, Russia to China, China to Hong Kong, Hong Kong. They ended up in the Philippines. Like 8 years later, she gets her 3 boys out of the orphanages and brings them into the Philippines. And in the Philippines, what do they have to do? They have to hide from the Japanese Imperial Army for all 4 years. That book's at the publisher, and I hope to have it out sometime next year. The sky took back the space the towers borrowed when the destructive forces rendered them unstable. 3,000 souls ascended the holy rubble, while a nation looked on in horror and in sorrow. Millions round the world stood stunned and shaken as those who hijacked the Koran cheered on. All America grieved and shared their losses as flags unfurled across the land. Celebrities and charities raised money for the relatives living, while Springsteen sang about the rising. My parents, were living their last days so far away, going back and forth and then watching. And the toughest memory I have is the last day I saw my father alive. He was standing behind the cab as we drove away, and I saw him through the rearview mirror waving to me. That was really hard. That was probably the hardest thing I ever did, is to have to see him through the rearview mirror as we drove away. I don't think we talked about it, that's not something back then that you talked about. And it wasn't that long ago. It was in the mid-'80s. It just, you both knew, you both understood, but it wasn't discussed, you know, just wasn't. And my mom, when I finally she died, you know, a year later, same thing, going back and forth a few times, but she died in the hospital. She felt bad. My sister and I just said, "You're going to the hospital." And I was so shocked that I got a call at 2 in the morning and she had passed away. And never thought she was passing away. I just thought she needed to spend some time in the hospital to recover. But I will tell you this, they were both very heavy smokers their whole lives, and they were fairly heavy drinkers too. So between taking out your liver and taking out your lungs, something I learned from them is I don't smoke and I don't drink, and I work out, you know, twice a week and try to eat healthy and give my body a chance to keep going, you know. You got to do that. And again, nobody knew back then. I mean, even cigarette packs didn't have a warning on them back then. And gosh, the only thing you'd see was advertising for cigarettes in magazines and billboards. So, you know, one of the things that we do with our minds is we can blank out the bad things and put them way back in your mind. So I don't really recall what happened when I came back. I probably just got up the next morning and went to work and did what I always do. You know, that's just the way I am. Pretty stoic kind of a guy.
That you can recall. Just one. You have to pick one.
I can't pick one.
I just favorite thing ever.
Oh, come on. I imagine being a youngster in New Jersey on Saturday afternoons, me and my buddies, we would go to the movies and we would see a triple, you know, movie and the comics and then we would end up going back to the lake. There was Clementon Lake Park. It was an amusement park. And for a couple of quarters, you could spend the whole afternoon. You could play skeet ball. You could ride all these rides they had. They had a jackrabbit, and they had these things that swung way out over the, and then you could swim in the lake. And we swam all afternoon. I mean, we just never got out of the water. So my greatest thrills in life was just being outdoors and doing things and being, you know, with my friends at that time and being alone in the woods. So it's hard to pick one. I mean, that's one, but and later in life I had other things. I had traveled a lot, but no, I think being young and growing up before we moved back to Philadelphia, my high school years, that was the greatest. That's a tough question. I guess I would say keep more balance in your life, which I've said before, and also be kind to people. I mean, it's, you know, we're all in this together. We have to be kind to one another. And I think that alone, I mean, the golden rule, do unto others, you'd have them do unto you, is unbelievable, because we need to be kind. We need to see from another person's point of view. What I never got into is that I would say you could probably state that my mother was a racist, in the sense that she would see someone on television and she would, you could just tell that she felt superior to anybody that she saw on television. And when I went to high school, the most racist school board in America, I will say, was the Philadelphia School Board in 1957. I'll tell you why they were the most racist school board in America. They changed the name of Northeast High, where I went, because they wanted to move the name of that school to a better neighborhood. And they left the school behind, and they called it Thomas Alvin Edison, that black and Puerto Rican hero, right? I mean, they just decided they were moving this school, and instead of starting with a new school, they left that one behind. And I felt so bad about that, because more high school students from Northeast High died in Vietnam than any other high school in America. And then when I went to college in Rutgers, they had open enrollment. So they gave me, I was president of my senior class, they gave me the job of bringing Black and Puerto Ricans into the Rutgers University. So the first thing I did was join the BPUM, the Black People's Unity Movement. I think I was the only white guy that was ever invited in. And I made it their goal to bring people that we could bring into Rutgers University. We exceeded our goal tenfold and brought young people into Rutgers that never would have had an opportunity. So I'm very much cognizant of the way I was raised, and I just think the world has to be much more open and acceptable to others. I don't believe I ever worked another day in my life. As Confucius said, find a job you like and you'll never work again. That happened to me.